Stop lying to yourself. You said the right thing, but it still landed the wrong way. You reached for connection, and people pulled back. You spoke with confidence, and nobody trusted the sound of it. That pain stays with you longer than you admit. Because being misunderstood does not just bruise your pride, it makes you question your own voice. The truth is, trust is not built slowly by accident. It is built fast, in the right words, spoken at the right moment, with the right control. And if your language keeps leaking doubt, fear, pressure, or hidden need, people feel it before they understand it. That is what changes now. Here is the uncomfortable truth that most self-help books will never tell you. Trust has nothing to do with being honest. Wait, let me explain. Honesty is about what you say. Trust is about how what you say lands in the other person's nervous system. You can tell the absolute truth and still sound manipulative. You can have pure intentions and still come across as desperate. Why? Because people don't trust your words. They trust the feeling your words create inside them. And that feeling is generated by a set of linguistic patterns, so precise, so predictable, that once you learn them, you can trigger trust on command. Not fake trust, not manipulative trust. Genuine, magnetic, unshakable trust, because your words finally match the safety people are unconsciously searching for. In the next hour, I am going to show you the exact architecture of trust-building language. We will start with the 3 deadliest phrases that destroy your credibility before you finish your first sentence. Phrases you probably use every single day without realizing it. Then we will rebuild your speech from the ground up, installing what I call the trust triggers. Specific word choices, tonal shifts, and pacing techniques that signal safety, competence, and certainty to the human brain. You will learn why "I think" makes you sound weak, why "honestly" makes you sound dishonest, and why the most trusted people in the world speak slower, not faster. This is not about becoming a smooth talker or a manipulative charmer. This is about removing the noise from your communication so your real value can finally be seen, heard, and believed. By the time this audiobook ends, you will never be misunderstood again. Let's begin with the first trigger, the one that costs you nothing but changes everything. Chapter 1. The invisible leak. You have felt it before. The room did not turn against you. It just cooled. A face stayed polite. A nod came too fast. A reply sounded clean, but empty. Nothing dramatic happened, yet something slipped away right in front of you. You left the conversation replaying every line, searching for the mistake, because on the surface, you said what should have worked. You were kind enough, clear enough, smart enough. Still, trust did not land. That is the part that frustrates you. You can handle rejection when it is obvious. You can handle conflict when it is direct. But this quiet distance is harder to face because it gives you nothing solid to fight. It leaves you in silence, and silence exposes what noise can hide. Stop for a second. Think about how often this happens. Think about how long you have blamed timing, mood, or luck. The truth is, most people do not hear words first. They feel the state behind them. They feel whether your language is trying to force an outcome. They feel whether you are steady or hungry, honest or managing impressions, calm or secretly asking for approval. That feeling arrives before logic, before analysis, before trust has a chance to form. Your tone, pace, and choice of words have already made a case for or against you. This is why a person can say, "I am being honest," and still sound false. This is why a person can offer help and still feel threatened. This is why a person can speak gently and still trigger resistance. Words do not operate alone. They carry the weight from the mind that shaped them. If your inner state is scattered, your language will leak it. If your inner state is clean, even simple words gain power. You do not lose trust only by lying. You lose trust when you sound like you need something too badly. You lose trust by speaking too much before earning space. You lose trust by defending yourself before anyone attacks you. You lose trust by decorating truth so heavily that it starts to smell like strategy. None of that looks extreme in the moment. That is why it survives for years. Pause here. Look at your own habits. How many extra words have cost you more than silence ever did? People trust clarity because clarity feels safe. They trust calm because calm signals control. They trust direct speech because it removes the hidden hint inside the conversation. When you speak in a way that lets the other person breathe, you lower their guard without begging them to. That matters more than charm, more than polish, more than sounding impressive. The hardest part is that you can sabotage trust while trying to create it. You can over-explain because you want to be understood. You can soften every statement to sound kind. You can rush into agreement because you want harmony. Yet each of those moves can tell the other person that you do not fully stand on your own words. And if you do not stand on them, why should they? The truth is, trust begins where strain ends. It begins when your words stop reaching and start standing. It begins when your language stops chasing acceptance and starts carrying truth without apology. That shift sounds small. It is not small. It is a complete change in how your voice enters the world. Need makes language weak. Control makes language clear. Truth speaks best when it is not begging to be loved. Read those lines against your own life. You do not need a better vocabulary first. You need less leakage, less hidden panic, less performance, less pressure inside each sentence. Because people hear pressure even when your words are technically correct. This is where most people stop. They assume trust is chemistry. They assume some people simply have it and others do not. They protect themselves with that excuse because it feels easier than discipline. But trust is not magic. It is a pattern. It is timing. It is a restraint. It is the ability to say only what must be said, in a way that shows you are not fighting for control. That discipline changes more than conversation. It changes your relationships, your work, your first impressions, your authority, your peace. Once you see how language leaks your inner state, you cannot unsee it. Then every careless phrase starts to look expensive, and when you finally notice what your words have been confessing without permission, the next wound becomes impossible to ignore. Chapter 2. The Cost of Being Misread. Being misread wears you down in a strange way. It does not always leave a clean scar. It leaves a fog. You start to question whether you are too much or not enough, too direct, too soft, too intense, too careful. You begin adjusting yourself in real time, trying to find a version that lands cleanly, and that constant adjustment creates another problem. You stop sounding like someone rooted in truth and start sounding like someone testing masks. That is exhausting. It is also dangerous, because once your speech turns into constant correction, trust breaks before connection even begins. People sense when they are meeting a moving target. They do not always know why it bothers them. They just feel unsettled. Stop here. Think about the last time you edited yourself mid-sentence. Think about what that did to your tone. You may think the pain of being misread comes from other people's carelessness. Sometimes that is true, but often the deeper pain comes from hearing your own voice become less solid every time you try to protect yourself. You start speaking with too many qualifiers. Maybe, sort of, just, kind of, I guess. You give the listener 5 exits before the sentence even arrives. That feels safe to you because it reduces the risk of outright rejection, but it also lowers the chance of respect. Trust does not attach itself to language that is constantly retreating. Trust grows when your words show choice, not aggression, not stubbornness, choice. A chosen sentence has shape. It knows why it exists. It does not wobble under its own weight. When you speak like that, people relax because they no longer have to do the work of guessing what you mean. Being misread also tempts you into overproving. You tell longer stories than necessary. You add details nobody asked for. You explain your motives before they have been questioned. On the surface, that looks like transparency. Underneath, it often sounds like fear. And fear has a sound. It has a rhythm. It pushes too hard. It arrives too early. It tries to close every gap before the other person has time to step into it. Pause for a second. Silence is not your enemy. The need to fill it is. The truth is, people do not trust you more because you reveal more. They trust you more when what you reveal matches the moment. Precision creates safety. Oversharing creates friction. If your words flood the space, the other person cannot find their footing. They begin guarding themselves, not because you were cruel, but because you were uncontrolled. There is another cost. When you keep being misread, you start building sentences from a place of defense instead of truth. You stop asking, "What is real?" and start asking, "How do I avoid losing this person?" That question corrupts your language. It makes you flatter when you should be clear. It helps you agree on when to pause. It makes you laugh when nothing is funny. It makes you promise what your body already knows you do not want to carry. Every weak sentence trains people to doubt you. Every honest sentence trains you to trust yourself. The price of false comfort is quiet self-betrayal. This is where most people stop. They blame communication problems on style. They watch polished speakers and copy the surface. They borrow phrases, facial expressions, and even timing. But trust is not born from imitation. A borrowed voice always sounds borrowed. People may not name it, but they feel the gap between your words and your center. That gap is the real damage of being misread. It teaches you to perform, and performance can earn attention for a while, but attention is not trust. Attention can be driven by charm, novelty, beauty, pressure, fear, or confusion. Trust is simpler and harder. Trust asks whether your language matches your state matches your values, and your values withstand pressure. You do not repair this by becoming louder. You repair it by becoming cleaner motives, cleaner timing, cleaner words. When your speech stops carrying hidden panic, people stop bracing against it. When your sentences stop chasing approval, they start carrying weight. The truth is, a misread life often begins with tiny habits of self-abandonment. A laugh you did not mean, an apology you did not owe, a promise you never should have made, a sentence softened until the truth could no longer stand inside it. Small moments, repeated often. That is how your voice loses shape. But once you see the cost, you start asking a harder question. Not why people fail to trust you, why your words keep announcing need before you ever say what matters. Chapter 3. The smell of need. Need has a scent. It is not visible, but people feel it fast. It rides inside your language like heat under a closed door. You can say all the right things, use all the right manners, keep your posture steady, and still give yourself away, because need changes the texture of speech. It makes words cling. It makes pauses feel desperate. It makes kindness feel like a trade. It makes confidence sound rehearsed. You know this feeling. You wanted the person to like you. You wanted the deal to close. You wanted the room to approve. You wanted the conflict to disappear. So you spoke from hunger, and hunger always reaches too far. Stop for a moment. You do not need to hate your need. You need to see what it does. The truth is, people do not trust language that is secretly trying to take something from them. Approval, reassurance, a quick yes, a softer judgment. Even if your request is never spoken aloud, your state can load the sentence with pressure. The other person starts feeling managed. They may smile, they may even cooperate, but something inside them stays guarded, because your words did not arrive freely. They arrived carrying a quiet demand. Need to change your timing first. You speak too soon. You answer before understanding. You rush to prove warmth before warmth has room to grow. You volunteer more than the moment requires because you are trying to buy certainty with access. But certainty does not work that way. When you overoffer, people feel the imbalance. They wonder what is driving you. And once they start wondering that, trust is already in danger. You also need to change your honesty, not always into direct lies, often into shaped truth. You say what keeps you safe. You omit what may create tension. You make your opinions smaller. You make your standards softer. You hide a clear preference behind flexible language because you are afraid the truth may cost you a place in the room. The cost of that habit is brutal. Every time you shrink a true sentence to protect your image, you train your voice to detach from your center. Pause here. How many times have you called it being easygoing when it was really scary? This is where most people stop. They think trust comes from being agreeable, so they become lighter, smoother, and easier to digest. But people do not deeply trust what has no edges. If your speech always bends to fit the mood, it may sound pleasant, but it does not sound solid. Trust needs to feel structure. It needs to sense that your words come from a person who can tolerate discomfort without collapsing into performance. Need makes you chase instant relief. That is why it is so dangerous. It does not ask what builds long-term credibility. It asks what will stop the current tension. It pushes you to over-explain, to joke too fast, to apologize for your own existence, to say yes before your mind has spoken. It offers emotional survival in the moment and steals authority over time. Need is loud, even when your voice is soft. People trust the person who can afford to pause. Desperation hides inside decoration. That last line matters. Need loves decoration. It adds extra praise, extra softness, extra disclaimers, extra promises. It does nothing to avoid the clean risk of direct truth. But every extra layer makes the sentence feel less natural, less breathable, less safe. People may not say, "This sounds needy." They will say, "Something feels off." That is the same verdict. The truth is, the cure is not coldness. It is self-possession. It is learning to speak from enough steadiness to let silence exist, enough control to state a fact without dressing it up, enough discipline to want connection without making connection your master. When you speak enough, your language no longer grabs, it offers, it names, it leaves room. That room is where trust starts breathing. Need fades when your words are no longer tasked with saving you. That is a hard standard, but it is clean. Your sentence does not need to secure love. It does not need to erase doubt. It does not need to guarantee an outcome. It needs to tell the truth with control. That alone makes you rarer than you think. Once your words stop chasing, another weakness becomes easier to hear. It has been hiding inside politeness for years, and it destroys trust without making a sound. Chapter 4. Words that apologize for your existence. There is a form of speech that sounds harmless because it is wrapped in manners. It sounds respectful, careful, considerate, yet underneath it carries surrender. It is the language of a person asking permission to take up normal space. Not because space must be earned, because fear trained that person to apologize before speaking. You have heard it yourself. This might be stupid, but sorry, just a thought. I could be wrong, but you probably already know this. Small phrases, common phrases, poisoned phrases. They lower your status before the idea even arrives. They teach the listener how to treat their words before their words have had a fair chance. Stop and look closely. This is not humility. This is a retreat disguised as politeness. The truth is, a false apology does not make you more likable. It makes your language easier to dismiss. A real apology has power because it is rare, clear, and deserved. It repairs, it takes responsibility, it restores truth. But a constant apology weakens both your voice and the meaning of remorse. When sorry becomes filler, it stops sounding moral and starts sounding scared. Many people learn this habit early. You kept the peace by shrinking first. You lowered your volume before anyone asked. You softened your truth so others could stay comfortable. You turned self-erasure into a social skill. That may have protected you once. It may have even won approval, but it also taught your nervous system that visibility is danger. So now your language keeps kneeling before the room, even when the room has not demanded it. That habit enters professional settings, it enters friendships, it enters love, it enters conflict. You ask whether your basic needs are okay. You frame your direct statement as a burden. You explain why your boundary should not bother anybody. You smile while saying things that cost you internally. Then later, you wonder why resentment keeps building in private. It builds because your mouth keeps leaving your spine behind. Pause here. You are not rude for being clear. You are not arrogant for being direct. This is where most people stop. They mistake weakness for kindness. They assume that making themselves smaller is proof of good character. But trust does not grow around chronic self-dismissal. People may enjoy its convenience. They may even reward it. Still, deep down, they do not feel anchored by a voice that abandons itself so quickly. A trusted voice does not need to dominate. It does not need to win every room. It simply refuses to kneel without reason. It says, "Here is what I think." It says, "Here is what I can do." It says, "No." It says, "That does not work for me." No fireworks, no guilt, no extra theater. Just chosen words carrying chosen truth. An apology owed has dignity. An apology not owed becomes self-erosion. Your voice loses power every time it begs to exist. That line hurts because it is true. And this truth cuts deeper when you notice how often a false apology is paired with another habit, preemptive defense. You defend before speaking. You brace before asking. You justify before refusing. You wrap every sentence in a protective blanket because you assume impact will create punishment. But protection can become a confession. It tells the listener that even you are not fully standing by your own words. The truth is, people trust what sounds internally settled. Settlement does not mean harshness. It means the sentence has been accepted by the speaker before it reaches the listener. That changes everything. When you say, "I am not available for that," without apology, you do not sound cruel, you sound organized. When you say, "I see it differently," without shrinking, you do not sound hostile, you sound awake. This kind of speech takes discipline because it forces you to tolerate the moment after truth leaves your mouth. No rushing in to soften, no immediate repair, no frantic smile, just the quiet aftermath of a clean sentence. That aftermath is where your old habits panic. It is also where your new authority is built. Once you stop apologizing for normal existence, another ugly pattern becomes impossible to miss. It wears confidence, like a costume, and it ruins trust while pretending to create it. Chapter 5. The performance that kills credibility. There is a kind of confidence that sounds polished for a few minutes, then hollow. It uses strong words. It keeps steady eye contact. It has practiced timing. It knows how to sound certain, yet something in it feels thin. You hear the smoothness, but not the ground under it. That is performance. And performance always asks the listener to admire the mask, while quietly ignoring the emptiness behind it. You may have used it yourself without naming it. You walked into a room feeling unsure, so you tried to sound unshakable. You made your tone firmer than your center. You copied the cadence of authority. You reached for phrases designed to impress. For a moment, it may have felt like control. But control borrowed from an image always creates tension. Strength is not a costume. People can hear the seams. The truth is, credibility dies when your language tries too hard to sound credible. Real authority does not announce itself every 5 seconds. It does not need excessive certainty. It does not pile on dramatic statements. It does not inflate simple facts. Performance does all of that because performance is terrified of being ordinary. But ordinary truth, spoken cleanly, is often more powerful than dramatic nonsense delivered with flair. Performance speaks in absolutes it has not earned. Always, never, everyone, nobody. It promises too much. It labels too fast. It reaches for intensity before evidence. And when pressure arrives, it either crumbles or doubles down. That is why people become suspicious around speakers who sound too polished too early. The polish is not the problem, the strain beneath it is. Many people perform because they think trust comes from certainty. It does not. Trust comes from congruence. Your words, your timing, your restraint, and your emotional state all need to match. If you sound more certain than your facts support, people feel manipulated. If you sound wiser than your actions support, people feel threatened. If you sound calmer than your nervous system actually is, your body will betray you in 100 subtle ways. Do not ask how to sound stronger. Ask what in you still needs theater. This is where most people stop. They refine delivery rather than truth. They work on tone, posture, and phrasing while leaving motive untouched. That creates a dangerous speaker. Maybe not dangerous through force, dangerous through confusion, because performance can briefly fool people, including the person performing, but it cannot create peace. It cannot create lasting respect. It cannot create the kind of trust that survives disappointment. A credible voice can say, "I do not know." A performing voice hates that sentence. A credible voice can say, "I need time to think." A performing voice rushes to fill the gap. A credible voice can speak with force when force is needed, and simplicity when simplicity is enough. A performing voice stays trapped at the same volume because it is still trying to sell the image. Performance wants approval. Truth wants accuracy. Authority grows when image stops leading. That last line is the hinge. The moment the image stops leading, language changes. It gets quieter, cleaner, more exact. You stop decorating your point. You stop trying to win people with verbal fireworks. You become willing to let a plain sentence do its work. That willingness is rare because plain truth leaves nothing to hide behind. It asks you to stand there with no costume. The truth is, this is not about becoming dull. It is about becoming real enough that your energy no longer has to carry a false story. Then your actual presence becomes stronger. A calm voice, without hidden performance, often lands harder than a dramatic voice full of self-promotion. People trust what does not appear to be seducing them. When the costume drops, you hear a new standard calling for you. Fewer tricks, less noise, more choice. That is where discipline finally steps in, not as punishment, but as rescue. Chapter 6. The Discipline of Plain Speech. Once the noise starts falling away, plain speech can feel almost too simple. That is because you have been trained to think that power must sound decorated. You have been taught that more words mean more intelligence, more softness means more kindness, and more certainty means more authority. Plain speech exposes how false those lessons were. It strips the sentence down until only what matters remains. That can feel naked at first. Good. Naked truth is easier to trust than padded confusion. Plain speech is not crude. It is not careless. It is not blunt for the sake of ego. It is disciplined language that says enough and stops. It does not wander. It does not flatter. It does not hide fear inside filler. It chooses the cleanest, truthful form and leaves the rest behind. Stop for a second. Can your point survive without decoration? If not, your point may not be clear yet. The truth is, plain speech builds trust because it lowers cognitive friction. People do not need to decode you. They do not need to search for the real meaning buried under layers of performance, apology, or need. Your sentence arrives cleanly. That creates relief. Relief creates safety. Safety opens the door to trust. Look at how powerful simple lines can be. I do not agree. I need more time. That is not accurate. I am not available. I can do that by Friday. These lines do not beg. They do not attack. They do not hide. They do not promise emotional comfort beyond what is real. They simply stand. That standing is what gives them weight. Plain speech also forces internal honesty. You cannot speak plainly if you are unclear inside. You cannot be direct if you are still bargaining with your own truth. This is why the discipline matters. Before the clear sentence comes the clear decision. What do you mean? What do you want? What will you not carry? What is true even if it creates discomfort? Once those answers harden inside you, your language stops leaking confusion. Pause here. Control is not silence alone. Control is also a clean expression. This is where most people stop. They confuse plain speech with coldness. They think if they stop cushioning every sentence, they will become harsh. But harshness is not the result of clarity. Harshness is usually the result of resentment, ego, or poor timing. Clarity can be warm. Clarity can be kind. Clarity can even be gentle. What it cannot be is vague. A disciplined speaker respects the listener enough to be understandable. That is kindness. A disciplined speaker respects truth enough not to drown it in excess. That is integrity. A disciplined speaker respects themselves enough not to kneel before normal tension. That is dignity. This kind of speech changes the atmosphere around you because people stop wondering where they stand. Clarity is respect in verbal form. A controlled sentence can carry more power than a speech. When your words stop spilling, your presence starts speaking. That last line points to something deeper. Plain speech does not work alone. It works because the silence around it starts changing too. Once you stop throwing words at every discomfort, pauses no longer feel like threats. They become tools. They become proof that you are not ruled by panic. And when a person is not ruled by panic, trust rises almost on instinct. The truth is, plain speech restores your relationship with consequence. You start accepting that every honest sentence may cost something. A yes closes other doors. A no disappoints anybody. A clear opinion may create resistance. Good. Cost is not failure. Cost is reality. People trust you more when you show that reality does not scare you into distortion. This is where your voice begins to mature. No begging, no hiding, no show, just chosen truth in chosen form. And once you can speak like that, you become strong enough to use the force most people fear and misuse. Chapter 7. Silence as Proof. Most people think silence is empty. It is not empty. It is revealing. It shows who can stay present without rushing to manage perception. It shows who can sense tension without treating it as an emergency. It shows who trusts truth enough not to chase after it with 10 more sentences. Silence is not the absence of communication. Very often, it is the strongest part of it. You have seen the opposite. A person says too much after making a point. They explain, then explain the explanation, then add nervous humor, then circle back to make sure the room still approves. Every extra word weakens the original sentence, not because more detail is always bad, because the added words are not serving the truth. They are serving fear. Stop and notice this. If a sentence was clear, why did you keep talking? What were you trying to rescue? The truth is, silence builds trust because it demonstrates inner control. It shows that your language is not running loose under the pressure of uncertainty. When you can speak, stop, and remain settled, the other person senses stability. Stability is persuasive without trying to persuade. It tells the room that your words were chosen, not spilled. Silence also gives dignity to the listener. It lets the other person think. It lets the moment breathe. It lets meaning land without being forced. That matters, because trust does not grow when people feel cornered. It grows when they feel they have space to meet what is true on their own terms. Silence creates that space. Many people avoid silence because silence exposes the self. If you stop talking, you may have to feel your own uncertainty. You may have to face the fact that the other person might disagree, leave, reject, or simply not give you the response you hoped for. Talking becomes anesthesia. It dulls the edge of not knowing. But anesthesia also dulls impact. It turns sharp truth into verbal fog. You do not need to fill every gap. Some gaps are carrying your authority for you. This is where most people stop. They use silence as punishment or manipulation instead of discipline. That kind of silence feels cold and theatrical. It is not what matters here. Disciplined silence is not a game. It is composed of restraint. It says, "I have spoken. I can let the sentence stand." That is a very different force. Silence after a boundary makes the boundary real. Silence after a question makes the question weightier. Silence after a confession gives the truth room to live. Silence after a false accusation can reveal more confidence than a frantic defense ever could. Not always. Timing matters, context matters, but the principle stands. The person who can tolerate the pause often controls the emotional frame without ever dominating it. Silence is where weak motives panic. Stillness is often stronger than emphasis. The pause after truth is a test of your control. That test is not easy. You will feel the pull to rush in. You will want to soften the edge, rescue the mood, or prove you are still safe to love. That is old conditioning. Let it burn. Trust grows when you stop trying to govern every reaction. Your task is not to control the other person. Your task is to control your own expression. The truth is, silence does not replace words. It protects them. It keeps them from being diluted by fear. It turns language into choice instead of reflex, and once your words are protected by silence, they begin to gain a new quality. Not louder, not sharper, cleaner power. That is the point where people stop hearing a person who wants to be trusted and start hearing a person who already lives like trust matters. Chapter 8. The Language of Steady Power. Steady power does not sound rushed. It does not sound eager to dominate. It does not sound hungry for applause. It has nothing to prove in the first 5 seconds. That is why it unsettles people who are addicted to performance. They mistake calm for weakness until the calm sentence lands harder than their noise ever could. You know steady power when you hear it. A person says less, but every word arrives with shape. There is no scramble under the tone, no hidden begging, no frantic brightness trying to win the room. Just control, not stiff control, alive control, the kind that can be warm without dissolving and direct without becoming cruel. Stop for a second. You do not need a louder voice. You need a steadier center. The truth is, steady power is built through verbal consistency. Your yes means yes. Your no means no. Your maybe is real, not an escape hatch. Your apology is earned. Your praise is specific. Your concern is timely. Your silence is chosen. Over time, people stop listening only to individual sentences and start listening to your pattern. That pattern becomes your reputation before your mouth even opens. This is why trust can appear instant. It is not magic. It is recognition. People recognize coherence quickly. They feel the absence of contradiction. They hear that your language is not fighting your body. They sense that your tone, pace, and meaning belong to the same person. That coherence reads as both safety and strength. Steady power also means you stop using words as emotional weapons against yourself. No dramatic self-insults to seem humble, no fake uncertainty to seem likable, no inflated certainty to seem strong, no passive aggression to avoid the direct truth. Those habits fracture the voice. A fractured voice can still be loud, clever, or charming, but deep trust avoids it. Ask yourself a hard question. Can people predict your integrity from your speech alone? This is where most people stop. They try to sound powerful in isolated moments, while living carelessly between them. But trust does not come from occasional good lines. It comes from disciplined repetition. It comes from saying the true thing in small moments, not just dramatic ones. It comes from refusing empty promises. It comes from not using intensity as a substitute for clarity. Steady power sounds like ownership. I said I would do it. I did it. I cannot commit to that. That was my mistake. I disagree. I need more information. Clean lines. Strong spine. No performance. Each line teaches people how to relate to you. Each line teaches you how to live with yourself. Power is not force. It is consistency under pressure. Trust rises when your words stop changing with the weather. A stable voice creates stable relationships. The truth is, the other person is always asking a silent question. Not only, do I like this person? The deeper question is, can I relax around this person's reality? If your language is erratic, evasive, inflated, or hungry, the answer becomes no. If your language is plain, timed, and rooted, the answer becomes yes far more often than you think. Steady power does not mean every person will trust you. Some people fear honesty. Some people prefer performance because it lets them keep playing games. Let them go. Your task is not to seek universal approval. Your task is alignment. The right people trust faster when your voice no longer carries contradiction. Once that alignment becomes your pattern, something deeper begins to shift. You stop trying to use better words as a trick. You start becoming the kind of person whose words no longer need a trick at all. Chapter 9. The Identity of a Trusted Voice. At some point, this stops being about technique. It stops being about phrases, pauses, or first impression tactics. Those things matter, but they are not the core. The core is identity. A trusted voice is not built by memorizing clean language while living in internal chaos. It is built when your speech becomes the natural output of a disciplined inner life. That is where the real shift happens. You no longer ask, "What should I say to sound trustworthy?" You ask, "What kind of person am I becoming when pressure arrives?" If your identity is still organized around approval, fear, avoidance, or image, your language will eventually expose it. Maybe not in the first minute. Eventually. It always leaks. Stop here. This is not about sounding better. This is about becoming harder to corrupt. The truth is, the most trusted people are usually not the most decorated speakers. They are the least divided. Their private standards and public language are close together. Their values survive inconvenience. Their boundaries survive guilt. Their honesty survives temptation. Because of that, their words carry a quality that cannot be faked for long. Integrity has a sound. A trusted voice comes from a trusted self. Not perfect, not robotic, not always smooth, but internally ordered. You know what you stand for. You know what you will not say just to be liked. You know what you will not promise just to avoid discomfort. You know how to remain respectful without abandoning truth. That knowledge settles your language before the conversation even starts. Identity also changes how you handle mistakes. A weak identity relies on lies, delays, and deflection to protect its image. A stronger identity can say, "I was wrong." That sentence builds more trust than endless self-defense ever will. Why? Because people are not only measuring whether you can appear strong, they are measuring whether you can stay whole under pressure. Admission without collapse is proof of wholeness. Pause for a second. Can you tell the truth when it costs your image? That is where trust either forms or dies. This is where most people stop. They want the rewards of trust without the private discipline that creates it. They want people to feel safe with them while they continue speaking from impulse. They want credibility while treating language casually. But language is not casual. Every sentence is training. Every sentence either strengthens self-respect or weakens it. Every sentence either aligns you with the truth or moves you further from it. A trusted voice is built in tiny, unseen moments. The message you do not send in anger. The promise you do not make lightly. The clear refusal you give instead of the false maybe. The apology you offer without excuses. The compliment you mean. The silence you hold instead of flooding the room with nervous noise. None of that looks dramatic. All of it builds identity. Your voice becomes trusted when your life stops contradicting it. People hear your standards before they hear your argument. Truth gains force when your character keeps pace with it. The truth is, once identity shifts, language simplifies on its own. You no longer need 10 tactics to manage perception, because perception is no longer your god. You serve truth, discipline, and control, not in a cold way, in a clean way. That cleanliness removes the static from your speech. Then a final change begins. You start losing the urge to say things you once thought were necessary. Old phrases fall away. Old habits die. Old noise begins to sound unbearable in your own mouth. That is how you know the change is becoming permanent. Chapter 10. The words you no longer need. When your voice changes at the level of identity, the first sign is subtraction, not addition. You do not suddenly gain a magic set of phrases. You begin dropping the words that never served you. The extra apology, the defensive explanation, the flattering overreach, the vague promise, the nervous joke, the frantic certainty. The verbal clutter that once helped you survive now starts feeling heavy, false, and expensive. That is growth in its most practical form. You hear yourself almost say the old line, then stop. You almost soften the boundary, then do not. You almost explain the truth into weakness, then let it stand. This is not small. This is the evidence that control has moved from theory into instinct. Stop for a second. Listen to your own future voice. It says less because it carries more. The truth is, mature trust building is not about learning to make every person like you instantly. It is about removing the habits that make your language untrustworthy. Once those habits are gone, the right words become obvious because they are no longer competing with fear. You start choosing directness over decoration, timing over panic, presence over performance, reality over strategy. You no longer need phrases that ask for approval before speaking. You no longer need lines that pretend uncertainty you do not feel. You no longer need inflated claims to sound important. You no longer need soft lies to keep the peace. You no longer need to rescue every silence. That freedom is power, not flashy power, durable power. The kind that lets your words remain clean even when the room is tense. You also stop needing the illusion of control over how others receive you. This matters because trust can be invited but never forced. You can speak with discipline, clarity, and truth, and still be met with suspicion by a person committed to distortion. Let that reality mature you. Your job is not to conquer every perception. Your job is to make your voice a place where truth can live without begging. You are not responsible for every reaction. You are responsible for every sentence. This is where most people stop. They keep trying to engineer a perfect reception. But a trusted voice does not obsess over perfect reception. It obsesses over clean expression. It asks, did I say what is true, in the right amount, at the right time, with self-respect intact? If the answer is yes, the sentence has done its duty. Look at how much strength lives in what you no longer need. You no longer need to oversell your character. You no longer need to convince people you are calm while trembling inside. You no longer need to speak first just to avoid feeling invisible. You no longer need to call self-abandonment kindness. You no longer need to confuse being wanted with being trusted. Those losses are victories. The strongest words are often the ones you no longer chase. A trusted voice is built by what it refuses to carry. When fear leaves the sentence, truth finally has room. The truth is, trust still arrives in moments. A first answer, a first boundary, a first pause, a first honest admission, a first clean no. But those moments are no longer accidents for you. They become the natural expression of a disciplined inner order. That is the permanent shift. Your language stops trying to create a self. It begins to reveal a self that has already chosen how to live. And when that happens, people feel it almost immediately. Not because you found a trick, because your words are no longer fighting your truth. They arrive without a hidden need. They stand without apology. They end without panic. They leave space without fear. That is rare. That is memorable. That is trusted. From there, nothing needs to be added, only lived. Think about that for a moment. Every unnecessary word you speak is a tax on your credibility. And like any tax, it compounds over time. The person who apologizes before making a request, "I'm so sorry to bother you, but," pays a small price in that moment. But over 1,000 conversations, that habit has cost them thousands of dollars in lost respect, lost opportunities, and lost trust. They have been paying interest on a debt they never owed. And the worst part, they don't even notice, because the habit has become invisible to them, but it is screamingly visible to everyone else. When you reach this stage, something remarkable happens. You start catching yourself mid-sentence. You feel the old word rising in your throat, the word that used to protect you, placate them, or pad your ego, and you simply choose not to release it. You pause, you breathe, and you say something cleaner, something truer, something that weighs less on your conscience and more on your impact. That pause is not hesitation, it is mastery. It is the sound of a person who has finally decided that their words are too valuable to waste on fear. Imagine meeting two people. One speaks in rapid, uncertain bursts, filling every silence with nervous chatter, explaining themselves before they've even been questioned. The other speaks slowly, deliberately, with comfortable pauses between thoughts. Who do you trust more? The answer is obvious. Because trust is not attracted to volume, it is attracted to weight, and weight requires space. Space requires restraint. Restraint requires discipline, and discipline requires you to let go of the childish belief that more words mean more connection. They don't. More words mean more noise, and noise is the enemy of trust. Let me give you an example. Imagine you are in a negotiation. The old you would have filled the silence with nervous concessions, throwing in extra benefits to sweeten the deal, hoping the other person would like you enough to agree. But the new you sits quietly. You state your terms clearly, and then you stop. You let the other person sit with your words. You let the silence do the selling, and more often than not, they accept your terms, not because you convince them, but because your refusal to beg convinced them. That is the power of subtraction. You didn't add anything, you removed the desperation, and suddenly your value became undeniable. Each of those phrases is a small dagger to your credibility. They do not protect you, they expose you. They reveal a person who is afraid of being judged, dismissed, or wrong. And the tragedy is that by using them, you guarantee the very judgment you were trying to avoid. People don't trust people who don't trust themselves. And every pre-apology, every verbal hedge, every nervous qualification is a loud announcement that you do not trust your own voice. There is a special kind of freedom that comes when you stop rescuing silence. Most people feel a deep anxiety when a conversation goes quiet. They rush to fill the gap with anything, random thoughts, nervous laughter, irrelevant details, just to escape the discomfort. But the trusted person understands something the anxious person does not. Silence is not a void to be filled. It is a space where truth can breathe. When you let silence exist, you give the other person room to think, to feel, to respond honestly, and in that space, trust is born. Not through your words, through your willingness to wait. This is a hard truth. You can do everything right, say the perfect words, use the ideal tone, choose the right timing, and someone will still misunderstand you. Someone will still project their fears onto your speech. Someone will still twist your meaning to fit their narrative. And that is not your failure. That is their limitation. The mature communicator accepts this without bitterness. They do not waste energy trying to control the uncontrollable. They focus only on what they can control, the clarity, integrity, and discipline of their own words. That is enough. That is more than enough. Let that land. You are not accountable for how people receive your words. You are accountable for how you deliver them. If you speak with honesty, kindness, and precision, you have done your part. What happens next, the interpretation, the judgment, the acceptance or rejection, belongs to them. Do not carry their burden. Carry only your truth. That is how trusted people live. They take full responsibility for their expression and zero responsibility for the reactions they cannot control. Ask yourself this question before every important conversation. Am I saying this to serve the truth or to serve my fear? If the answer is fear, stop, restart, choose differently. Because fear-based words are always detectable. They leak through the cracks in your voice, the hesitation in your rhythm, the over-explanation in your delivery. People may not know what is wrong, but they know something is wrong, and that something is enough to break trust. But when you speak from truth, clean, unvarnished, unafraid truth, people feel it. They relax, they lean in, they believe. Not because of your cleverness, because of your courage. And here is the most beautiful part. When you stop needing all of these things, you discover that you already have what you were seeking. You don't need to convince people of your worth. Your words now carry it. You don't need to perform calmness. Your presence now radiates it. You don't need to speak first to feel seen. You now know that being heard matters more than being noticed. And you don't need to abandon yourself to be kind. You now understand that the kindest thing you can give anyone is the truth, delivered with love and without apology. That is not weakness. That is the strongest thing a person can be. This is the difference between the amateur and the master. The amateur speaks to become someone. The master speaks because they already know who they are. The amateur uses language to build a persona. The master uses language to express a reality. And reality, when expressed cleanly, is irresistible. People are starving for it. They are surrounded by performance, by pretense, by polished lies and soft distortions. When you offer them something real, something that doesn't flinch, doesn't hedge, doesn't beg, they recognize it instantly. And they reward it with the only thing that matters, their trust. Trust begins where hidden hunger ends. A steady voice is stronger than an impressive one. The sentence that stands clean will outlive the speech that performs. Silence protects truth when fear wants to dilute it. You lose power each time your words abandon your spine. Clarity is not harsh. It is disciplined respect. People trust the voice that does not beg to exist. When your words stop chasing, your presence starts leading. The truth is, your language reveals the life you have chosen. Choose a life where your voice no longer has to hide. So here you are, at the end of this journey. But really, this is where your journey begins, because knowing is not the same as doing. You now hold the code, The words, the triggers, the silence that speaks louder than any sentence. But knowledge without action is just entertainment. And you didn't come here to be entertained. You came here to be transformed. The next time you walk into a room, a meeting, or a conversation that matters, remember this. Trust is not given, it is triggered, and you now know exactly how to trigger it. Not through tricks, not through manipulation, through the simple, powerful, undeniably human art of speaking in a way that makes people feel safe, seen, and certain. That is your new superpower. Use it wisely, use it often, and watch how your world changes, one conversation at a time. This has been the Trust Code, the words that make people trust you instantly. Thank you for listening. Now go, speak, and be believed. Your words have power. The question is, will you finally use them?